Welcome to Mindful Leadership, Transforming Lives, with your host, Singh. This is where leadership meets purpose, presence, and passion. In today's fast paced, high pressure world, we face a leadership crisis. Too often, teams are led by managers who lack empathy, clarity, and vision, leaving individuals uninspired, disconnected, and undervalued. But it doesn't have to be this way. Great leadership isn't born, it's built. The end game: empower your leadership, inspire the world. Every week, join me, your host Singh, as we tackle the gaps in leadership and life coaching head on, learning how mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and compassion can redefine success. This isn't just another podcast, it's a mission to fill the void left by ineffective leadership. And it's not just about leadership in business. Life coaching for leaders and new executives is at heart of this journey. Ready to rise above the noise and lead with clarity, purpose, and impact? Join a global movement dedicated to reshaping the future of leadership one mindful moment at a time. Let's begin.
Welcome back to another episode of Mindful Leadership Podcast on the Transformation Network. The podcast where we turn stress into strategy, overthinking into clarity, and overwhelm into momentum. I'm your host, Singh, the leadership coach who has watched a lot of busy, talented people charge through their year without once stopping to ask whether they were charging in the right direction. Let's begin. I want to start with a story about a man. I will call him David. Devin was 46, a senior partner at a professional services firm, two kids, one dog, a marriage that he loves and does not pay enough attention to, and a job that he is, in his own honest words, crushing and being crushed by in roughly equal measures. He came to me last spring because his annual review had gone well. Bonus up, title affirmed, future was bright. And he had walked out of the meeting feeling, in his own words, like I had just been congratulated for running faster on a treadmill that nobody actually owns. He actually said this, saying, on paper, I am doing everything right. And inside, I cannot tell whether I'm growing or just getting older inside the same routines. I do not know how to tell the difference anymore. I've thought about that line a lot. I do not know how to tell the difference between growing and getting older, and let it sit. Because that is, in fact, what happens to most of us. We confuse motion with growth, we confuse more of the same with becoming more. And the only thing that lets us tell the difference is one thing most none of us make time for: reflection. Not journaling for its own sake, not staring out of the window, not the vague spiritual idea of, taking time for yourself that gets scribbled at bottom of a to-do list and never crossed off. I'm talking about real reflection, structured, honest, the kind that produces an answer you can act on by Tuesday. That is what I want to give you this week, outside the usual set framework sequence, as a standalone bonus episode, because reflection deserves its own room. It is not a sub step of any other practice, it is a practice underneath every practice. Without reflection, without it, every other framework I have taught on this podcast eventually drifts. So here the framework, and I'll tell you upfront: the word is the metaphor. The word is mirror. Hold up the mirror. Mindful, inquiring, recognizing, reframing, owning, and realigning. A mirror does not flatter you. A mirror does not argue with you. A mirror does not, for what matter, do anything for you. It only shows you what is actually there. And then it stays there patiently while you decide what to do about it. Now, that is what reflection at its best is. And the six letters in mirror are the six moves that turn act of looking at yourself into act of growing from what you see. So let's walk through it, right? First, the difference between rumination and reflection is where we get it wrong. I have to draw a line. And it is a line a lot of high functioning people get wrong. Rumination is what happens when you replay the same painful scene in your head at 2 in the morning, hoping that this time somehow you will think your way out of it. Reflection is what happens when you sit with a real question in daylight and let the answer rise. The two look similar from the outside, both involving thinking, both involving looking inward. Both, if you describe them to a friend over coffee, sound like I have been thinking a lot about myself lately. The difference is in ours. Rumination is a loop, reflection is a spiral. Rumination ends where it started, reflection ends one floor higher than where it began. Most people who tell me they reflect a lot are, when I look closely at the practice, actually ruminating. They are not generating new insights. They are replaying old footage with a higher volume. And the more they do it, the worse they feel, which is the cleanest possible signal that practice is not, in fact, working. My friends, the mirror method is, in part, a way to know which one you are doing. If you finish a session of reflection feeling lighter, clearer, and 1 inch closer to a decision, you reflected. Now, if you finish feeling heavier, more confused, and 1 inch further from a decision, you ruminated. The letters are how you stay on the right side of that line. So let me walk you through. The first one is the letter M for mindful pause. And it is the move that, when skipped, makes every other move impossible. You cannot reflect at speed of your inbox. You cannot reflect with 11 open tabs in your head. You cannot reflect with 3 Slack channels blinking. The first act of reflection is not thinking, it is stopping. And the most people skip this step because stopping in our culture feels like falling behind. It feels like the people who are stopping are pulling ahead. So we do not stop. We try to reflect while running. And we get the cognitive equivalent of taking a photograph while sprinting. Well, the image is blurry, and the blurry image is the one we make decisions from. And as I've always taught, a mindful pause is the deliberate creation, deliberate, indulging creation, a small window in which the engine is off. Not of your body, the engine of your reactivity. The voice that wants to do something before it has finished seeing something. Let's talk about Aisha. She was a chief of staff at a fast growing fintech, brilliant, tireless. She came to a session of ours one day visibly fraying. She had been reflecting on a hard week, she told me. I asked her where she had done the reflecting. She said, in the car, on the way here, between the two calls. It is not reflection, it is the debris we carry. I asked her just to do one thing before our next session: sit for 10 minutes in the chair with no device, no notebook, no music, no agenda, no meditating, not problem solving, just sitting in the chair until the chair felt like a chair and not a holding pen between the meetings. She came back 2 weeks later and told me it was one of the hardest 10 minutes of her professional life. And also that somewhere around minute 7, she had become aware of a feeling she had been carrying for 3 months and had not previously named. A specific, locatable, nameable feeling, which turned out to be the entry point for most important conversation she had with her CEO that year. The practice for the mindful pause is this. Once this week, sit for 10 minutes with nothing. No phone, no notebook, no agenda, not to think, not to fix, just to be in that chair until the chair stops being the holding pen. My friends, mindful pause because you cannot clearly see in water that is still moving. The second letter, I, is to inquire honestly. And this is the letter that decides whether the next 40 minutes are going to be reflection or a theater. Now, most people, when they sit down to reflect, ask themselves comfortable questions. Am I working hard enough? Of course you are. Am I a good person? Of course you are. Did I do my mistake? You always do your best by definition in the moment you are in. These questions sound like reflection. They are, in fact, self soothing, dressed up in reflecting clothes. You finish them feeling reassured, and reassured is exactly the wrong feeling for growth. To inquire honestly is to ask yourself the questions you have been quietly avoiding. The one that if you sat across from a trusted mentor and they asked it, you would flinch. Questions like, what am I tolerating right now that I know somewhere inside I should not be tolerating? Where am I performing competence to hide a real uncertainty? Whose approval am I still chasing that I do not actually respect? What conversation have I been postponing because I'm afraid of what is on the other side of it? A founder I coached sat down one Saturday morning to do some reflection. He spent 90 minutes journaling. He came to the session the following Monday very pleased with himself. He had filled 14 pages. I read them. And I told him, Marcus, as gently as I could, that you had written 14 pages of self defense. Beautifully argued, internally consistent, completely useless. Not one of the sentence has asked himself a question he did not already know the comforting answer to. So I asked him three questions that Saturday. What is one thing about your leadership this quarter that if your team described it to me honestly would actually sting? Who on your team you have been quietly resenting and not addressing? What are you afraid would happen if we told your co-founder the truth about how you felt about the last decision? He came back the following Monday. He came in looking like he had not slept, and he had a list of three actions, each one slightly terrifying, each one, when he actually did them in the weeks that followed, exactly was the right things. My friends, the practice for inquiring is this: write down three questions about your current life that, if a wise friend asked them across a table, you would flinch. Then sit with them for 15 minutes. Do not answer them quickly. The flinch is the signal you are in the right room. Inquire honestly. Because a mirror that flatters you is not a mirror, it is a poster. The third letter, recognize the patterns. And this is the letter that turns reflection from a series of one off insights into an engine of real change. A single hard truth looked at once will not change your life. A pattern seen clearly for the first time will. Because the pattern is the one thing you have been doing for years that until this moment you have been treating as a series of unrelated events. That was a bad boss. That was a bad relationship. That was a bad team. And then at some point, if you let the mirror stay up long enough, you see the small, embarrassing, freeing thing. Those three events had one variable in common. And friends, that variable is you, me, us, the one staring at the mirror. To recognize the patterns is to step back from single incident and ask, where else does this show up? When have I felt this exactly before? What kind of situation seems to keep me finding me? Or more honestly, what kind of situation do I keep finding myself in? Renata, a very senior executive I worked with, came to me convinced she had a bad luck with bosses. Problem. Three jobs in a row, three difficult relationships with the person above her. We did an exercise where she wrote out in some detail each of the three relationships. What had gone wrong, what had been said, what had not been said. And then she read the 3 pages out loud. Halfway through the third one, she stopped and she said very quietly, they are not the same person, but I am the same person in all three rooms. And then she described with a precision I will never forget the specific way she had in all three jobs withheld a particular kind of feedback from the person above her out of a particular fear she had not previously named, and then watched the resentment build until the relationship was unsalvageable. That was not a bad luck with bosses problem, that was a pattern. And the moment she saw it as a pattern, she could do something about it, which she did in her next job. And that job, by her own report, the best professional relationship of her career. So the practice in this, right? Take the most painful or persistent issue in your current life, at your work, at your home, in your friendship, in your society. Write down 2 or 3 previous times in your life when you felt the same kind of pain. Then look for the variable that is common across all of them. The variable almost always is not other person. It is the thing you do when you are in that situation. Recognize the patterns because the same scene playing out a third time is no longer a coincidence. It is the map. The fourth letter, reframe the story. And this is the letter that takes painful patterns and make it usable. A pattern seen clearly is not yet growth. It is just unflattering photograph. What turns the photograph into growth is the story you decide to tell yourself about the photograph. And here is the thing most people do not realize. You are already telling yourself a story about every pattern in your life. Let it stay. You did not pick up the story consciously, it was given to you by your family, by your industry, by your old teacher, by some moment in your past that wrote a sentence into your head you have been quoting ever since. Now, to reframe the story is to notice the sentence you have been quoting and to ask whether it is true. Ask whether it is useful and whether, on closer inspection, it is even yours. I give example of David. For 20 years, he told himself the story that he was not a creative person. That sentence had been said to him exactly once by a high school teacher in 2003, and he had been quoting it unexamined ever since. He had shaped which jobs he applied for, which projects he volunteered for, which conversations he stayed quiet in. He had built an entire career around a sentence that by one tired adult on one bad Tuesday 23 years earlier. We did one exercise. I asked him to write down the 3 pieces of work he had ever felt most proud of in his career. He wrote down. He wrote them down. Then I asked him very simply, were any of these creative? He looked at the page. All three were creative. He sat there for a long time. Then he said, with a small laugh, and had something else underneath. I think I have been operating an incorrect data for 23 years. Now, my friends, that reframe, I'm not a non creative person. I'm a creative person who was told once that I wasn't, and I believe it longer than I should have. Changed what he applied for, what he volunteered for, what he believed about himself in a meeting. And within a year, he had taken up the most creatively demanding project of his career. In his own words, he was writing a new sentence. Now, the practice to reframe is this: take the pattern you identified in the previous steps. Okay. Write down the sentence you have been telling yourself about it. Then ask three questions. Is it true? Is it useful? And is it mine? Or did somebody hand it to me? Then write a new sentence in your own words. That is closer to the truth as you see it. Reframe the story, reframe the thought, because the pattern is the photograph, but the story is the caption. And you are allowed to rewrite the caption. The next letter, O, own your part. And this is the letter where reflection stops being an internal exercise and starts becoming a moral one. You can pause, you can inquire, you can recognize the pattern, you can reframe the story. And if you stop there, you have done a lovely piece of internal work that will by Friday evaporate. Because insight without ownership is just content. It feels good in the moment and it produces no change. To own your part is to take the insights and locate specifically the piece of it that belongs to you, not the piece that belongs to your birth, not the piece that belongs to your parents, not the piece that belongs to the broken system. Those pieces are real. Those pieces matter. They are also almost always outside the territory you can actually act on. Your part is the part you can act on. And the practice of growth is practice of pulling that part, your part, out of the mess and naming it clearly. I coached Yolanda. She had spent 6 months in difficult dynamic with Pierre. We did the pattern work, we did the reframe. She came to a session with a beautiful articulated understanding of dynamic. 20 minutes of careful explanation. I waited until she was done. Then I asked her, that is great, Yolanda. Is this dynamic what is part of what you belongs to? She looked at me with something close to annoyance and said, I just spent 20 minutes telling you. And I said, you spent 20 minutes telling me about him, about them. What is the part that belongs to you? And she finally said, I've been waiting for him to apologize first. As long as I'm waiting for him, I'm not actually a free person in this. I'm a hostage to whether he ever does the thing he almost certainly never going to do. See, that was her part. Not the whole dynamic, her part. And the moment she named it, she could act on it. Which she did. And within a week, in a conversation that did not require him to apologize first. The practice of owning your part is this: take the insight from the previous four letters, write down in one sentence the specific part of the situation that belongs to me, not the whole situation, the slice that is mine, the thing I am doing or not doing that is within my power to change. My friends, own your part, because the territory you cannot change is not where growth happens. Growth happens in the territory you can. And then the sixth and the final letter, realign what matters. And this is the letter that turns the whole exercise from contemplation into life. Reflection at its best ends with a small, concrete adjustment, not a 5-year plan, not a vision board, a small adjustment to the next meeting, a different sentence in a difficult conversation, a meeting you decline, a meeting you finally schedule, a boundary you draw, a boundary you let go of, a practice you start, a habit you stop, something small, specific, soon, that aligns the next 7 days of your life with what the mirror just showed you. To realign with what matters is to translate insights into one micro act, just one, because the temptation after a good reflection session is to try to change 10 things at once. And 10 things change at once in practice is zero things change at all. The discipline is to pick one. So take a mindful pause, inquire honestly, recognize the patterns, reframe the story, own your part, and realign with what matters. Now, there are three traps to flag. One, confusing reflection with rumination. Remember that. Pitfall two, trying to do the work without the pause. And pitfall three, ending without alignment. So there are three small, all named things. One, tonight or tomorrow morning, sit in the chair for 10 minutes with no device, no notebook, no agenda. Not to think, not to fix, just to be the chair. Notice what is there when the noise lies down. In this episode, I'm sitting with you and you're noticing that the reason for your ear has felt like a motion without growth is that you have not been entirely sure which direction growth was supposed to point. Now, that is the exact place for which purpose factor assessment is built. A mirror is powerful, but mirror only shows you what is in front of it. It does not on its own tell you which way you are meant to walk. The direction of travel is what purpose factor assessment was built for. Mirror is not a beautiful idea. It is 6 small moves, 20 minutes, one correct act on the other side. The kind of practice you can build into Sunday night, and if you do, will quietly change the shape of the next 5 years of your life. Hold up the mirror, see what is there, do one small thing about it. Then come back. The mirror is patient. I'll see you next week. You're listening to Singh on Mindful Leadership Transforming Lives on the Transformation Network. Have a blessed day.
Thank you for watching Mindful Leadership Transforming Lives. With me, your host, Singh. We are honored to have you join us on this journey to explore the transformative power of mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and authentic leadership. Tune in every week on transformationtalkradio.com at noon Pacific on Tuesdays, where we will continue to explore how mindful leadership can create a ripple effect of positive changes in your life and lives of those you influence. This show is dedicated to helping you lead with purpose, presence, and passion. Whether you're navigating the complexities of business, building stronger connection with your team, or striving to make a meaningful impact in the world around you. More about the show, access additional resources, or dive deeper, visit singpowerupcoach.com. Remember, leadership isn't just about what you do, it's about who you are. Let's continue to transform lives together, one mindful moment at a time. See you next week.